The billionaire froze when he saw her. A giant gorilla knelt in the clearing, fists pressed into the soil, rocking with a grief so heavy the air itself seemed to sag around her. The sound she made wasn't a roar. It was a sob, jagged and guttural, like a funeral hymn broken in half. She clutched at the ground as if something should be there, as if her fingers could drag back a life already gone. Kofi Adeniyi had lived through 1,000 storms of power, mergers collapsing, rivals clawing at his empire, markets plunging millions into fire. But nothing had ever reached into his chest like this. The gorilla's cry pierced him in a place beyond language, a place where even money had no defense. Her eyes, vast and dark, were fixed on a space he could not see, and yet he understood. The baby was gone. The fixer at his side shifted uneasily, pretending to check his phone. The guide, Bako, said nothing, only tilted his head in quiet respect. The forest itself seemed to pause, cicadas dropping their relentless chorus, as though even insects understood a mother's mourning. But the grief carried a sharper edge. There was no body in the clearing, no blood, no predator's mark, just absence. "Where is it?" Kofi asked, his voice lower than he intended. Bako's reply was soft, but it cut. "Taken." The word slid through Kofi like a blade. He turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Taken?" "Her baby," Bako said. "Poachers. They know where to move, who to pay. She cries because she knows it still breathes." The fixer finally looked up, forcing a smile too thin to hold. "Sir, we should continue the tour. These things happen. Nature is cruel." "No," Kofi said flatly. "That is not nature." The gorilla's sob rose again, splitting the silence like glass. And as the sound cracked against his ribs, Kofi felt the weight of something pressing down on him. Not just the forest, not just the deal that had brought him here, but the realization that his presence, his money, might already be tangled in the crime. He wanted to turn away. He wanted to retreat back into numbers, contracts, and comfortable boardrooms where pain could be measured in percentages. But the sound held him. It wouldn't let go. Hours earlier, as the helicopter descended into the Ashiko Reserve, Kofi had expected triumph. 10,000 hectares of land, timber rights, mineral access, and conservation credits, neatly bundled for investors back in New York. The governor would smile for the cameras. His own board would applaud the expansion, and the world would see HaloSat not just as a satellite empire, but as a guardian of green capital. It was supposed to be smooth, but the forest had greeted him with something else. The smell had been the first sign, wet, heavy, and metallic, not just rain and rot, but something fouler beneath the canopy. Then the silence, the kind of silence that hides more than it reveals. And now this, a gorilla mother unraveling before his eyes, mourning not death but theft. Kofi pressed his thumb against the cracked face of his father's old watch. The tick was steady, a sound he had always trusted. His father's words echoed faintly. "Don't let money teach you to look away." "Why take the baby?" he asked finally, his eyes still locked on the gorilla. Bako adjusted his machete, scanning the trees. "Because a baby gorilla can be worth more than gold. Sold alive, hidden in crates, flown to men who want trophies, private zoos, secret collectors. They pay well. Always." Kofi exhaled sharply, as though the forest had shoved him. He knew supply chains, black markets, coded money transfers. He had built his empire by tracing invisible lines others missed. And he recognized the stench of organized crime even here. His gaze dropped to the ground. Half buried in the mud, a blue dart glittered faintly. He bent, picked it up, a tranquilizer round. Smooth, professional. Not the work of desperate hunters, but of men with backing, networks, roots, men who could make cargo disappear. The fixer paled. "Sir, really, it's not safe here. The governor is waiting. We must not be distracted." Kofi turned the dart in his hand. Invisible requires help, he thought. Flights unlogged, borders softened, officials bought. He looked back at the gorilla. She was folding a leaf over and over in her massive fingers, shredding it without noticing, a ritual of despair. Each tear of the leaf was like a second ticking off his watch. The fixer tried again. "When the contract is signed, security will improve. With your partnership, enforcement can be doubled. This is exactly why we need investment." The words were smooth, rehearsed, the language of deflection. But Kofi felt something shifting under them, a vibration in his chest he couldn't silence. This wasn't just a tragedy in the trees. This was connected to him. If he signed the deal, he wouldn't just inherit land, he'd inherit its ghosts. The gorilla lifted her head suddenly, eyes catching the light. For a moment, Kofi felt as if she saw straight through him, through the silk suit, the boardroom polish, the empire of satellites. She saw the boy he had once been, standing barefoot beside his father's chair, listening to hymns on a Sunday morning before ambition drowned them out. Her sob cracked again, louder this time, a jagged blade scraping bone. Kofi clenched the dart until it bit into his palm. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "Not nature. This is business." The fixer blinked. "Sorry, sir. Show me the boundary," Kofi said coldly. "All of it. Every corner." The jungle swallowed them again, but the sound followed. The gorilla's cry lodged itself under his skin, echoing with every step. He tried to imagine the baby alive in some cage, tiny fists clinging to wire, eyes wide with terror. He tried not to imagine how much someone would pay, but deep down he knew this was just the beginning, because if the forest could cry, it was warning him. What you're about to sign is written in blood, not ink. And when the truth unraveled, it wouldn't just change his empire, it would change him. The sound haunted him long after they left the clearing. Kofi Adeniyi walked with his entourage along a narrow patrol path, but his mind was still shackled to that gorilla's cry. Every crunch of his shoe in the mud seemed to echo it. Every drop of sweat crawling down his back reminded him of the animal's rocking body, her fingers twisting a leaf into nothing. He had been in jungles before, touring reserves with conservationists eager to slap his name on plaques. But never had the wild looked at him like this, never had it accused him. Bako, the guide, strode ahead with the patience of a man who knew the forest kept secrets. His machete parted vines in small, steady motions. The fixer, still too polished for mud and shadows, kept glancing nervously at Kofi, as though the billionaire's silence was more dangerous than a rifle barrel. Finally, Kofi broke it. "You said they pay well," he said, his voice steady but cold. Bako glanced over his shoulder. "They do. Men with no names, buyers with private jets. Each baby can fetch hundreds of thousands, sometimes more." The fixer jumped in, tone slick. "Sir, please, this is why we're here to protect. With proper capital, poaching can be controlled. You know how enforcement works in places like this, underfunded, untrained. Your investment will change that." Kofi stopped walking. The forest seemed to close its throat around them, muffling the insects. He lifted the tranquilizer dart he still carried between two fingers. "You're telling me poachers with tranquilizers this clean are just opportunists? That they slipped through by chance?" The fixer swallowed. His eyes darted to Bako, who said nothing, only watched the billionaire like a man waiting for thunder. "Someone gave them access," Kofi continued. "Someone with clearance. Invisible trade requires invisible doors." He turned the dart in his hand, metal glinting in a thin shaft of sun. "Doors opened by men in offices, men who wear ties, not mud." The fixer tried to laugh, too high and too quick. "Sir, you read too much into—" "Quiet!" Kofi snapped, and the word cracked through the path like a whip. The fixer's mouth clamped shut. Kofi breathed slowly, fighting the storm inside. In boardrooms he was known for his calm, for a poker face that never cracked, but the jungle was testing him differently. The cry of the gorilla had burrowed into him, dragging up memories he had no use for. He remembered his mother standing over a small coffin when he was a boy, singing hymns through tears she never explained. He remembered the silence after, the house too quiet, his father working longer hours, his own childish vow to escape the weakness of grief by building something so large, no sorrow could ever crush it. Yet here, one animal's cry was pulling the stitches loose. He turned to Bako. "Tell me everything, not the tourist story, the real one." Bako's eyes narrowed slightly, measuring him. Then he spoke, voice like gravel. "This forest is marked. Every track, every flight corridor. Men from the city know when rangers patrol. Sometimes rangers look away. Sometimes they are paid to walk the other direction. The buyers do not risk their hands. They risk money, and money moves faster than any patrol." Kofi's jaw tightened. "So the government knows." "The government eats," Bako said simply. The fixer muttered, "Careful," but Kofi silenced him with a glance. They reached a ridge. Below stretched a wide valley, mist pooling like milk in a bowl, treetops punching through like islands. It looked eternal, untouched. But Kofi knew better. Invisible lines cut across it. Ownership papers, mineral rights, future logging concessions. Soon, it would bear his signature. And signatures, he knew, were cages. The gorilla's cry seemed to rise again from the valley floor, carried by memory or wind. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in the darkness behind his lids, he saw the image too vividly. A baby, small, soft, ripped from its mother's chest, crated, sedated, eyes blinking in terror as strange hands dragged it away. He opened his eyes sharply, the bile already rising. This was not just tragedy, it was enterprise. "Bako," he said quietly, "if I wanted to see where they take them, where would I go?" Bako hesitated. The fixer nearly choked. "Sir, that is absurd. You're here to close a land deal, not—" "Answer me," Kofi said. The guide studied him. His silence was a test, a measure of whether this billionaire was another tourist with a conscience that would fade on the flight home, or something else. Finally he said, "There is a place. Nights, sometimes. They move things through an old logging depot on the river. But it is not for you." "Not for me?" Kofi asked. "Because men like you," Bako said, "are either buyers or blind." The words hit harder than any insult. For a second, Kofi thought of turning back, of burying himself in the clean safety of contracts and cameras. But then he remembered the gorilla's eyes, eyes that had pierced through silk and status, eyes that had recognized him as something more fragile than he wanted to admit. He shook his head. "Not blind," he murmured. "Not anymore." The fixer groaned, rubbing his temples. "Sir, this is not wise. You risk the entire deal, your reputation, your safety. Please, let the governor handle it. Let the authorities—" "The authorities are the problem," Kofi cut in. They stood in silence, the weight of the forest pressing around them. Kofi slipped the dart into his pocket, next to his father's cracked watch. Two symbols, one of inheritance, one of theft. He felt their edges grind against each other with every step he took. By the time they reached the governor's compound that evening, the jungle's cry was still with him. It threaded through his thoughts during handshakes, haunted the polite laughter over warm beer, and pulsed beneath every false promise the governor made about enforcement and protection. But more than anything, it waited for him in the dark. That night, lying awake under the drone of ceiling fans, he closed his eyes and heard it again. The sob, the absence, the echo of something stolen, and deep in the shadows, a question coiled tighter and tighter around his mind. If the baby still lived, could he bring it back? Stay with me, because when Kofi decides to look for the truth, he'll discover that the line between savior and sinner is thinner than he ever imagined. Morning broke heavy and grey, the kind of light that made the jungle look like it was hiding something. Kofi Adeniyi sipped bitter coffee on the governor's veranda, but his mind wasn't on the day's agenda or the cameras waiting to capture his signature. His mind was on the clearing, the gorilla's cry still rattling like loose metal in his chest. He stared at the rim of his cup, and for the first time in years, he doubted the purpose of everything he had built. A billion-dollar empire measured in satellites, stocks, and signatures, yet one sound from the jungle had cracked it all open. Bako appeared without ceremony, stepping onto the veranda as if shadows carried him. The governor's staff frowned, but didn't interfere. Perhaps they knew better than to challenge a man who walked with the forest. "You did not sleep," Bako said. Kofi raised his eyes. "Did you?" "Sleep is for men who can forget," the guide replied. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the distant hum of generators and the nearer chirp of cicadas. Then Bako leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You asked yesterday about where they take them. You should not ask again." "Why?" Kofi asked. "Because a man with money is never only a witness," Bako said. "If you see too much, they will decide what you are, buyer or enemy." The words settled like stones in Kofi's gut. Buyer or enemy. No middle ground, no room for neutrality. "You think I'm a buyer?" Kofi asked. Bako studied him. His silence was sharper than words. Kofi set the coffee down. "I didn't come here for animals. I came for land. But now—" He stopped himself. His own voice felt strange, like someone else was speaking through him. "Now I can't shake it. That sound, her grief. Bako nodded slowly, as though measuring whether to believe him. Then he said, "The depot I mentioned. It is not far. But if you go, you cannot return as you came." Kofi frowned. "Meaning? Meaning once you see what waits there, you will never again believe in paper signatures and polite speeches," Bako said. "The trade will stain you, like smoke. You can wash, but the smell stays." The fixer stormed onto the veranda at that moment, suit freshly pressed despite the humidity. His voice was all alarm. "Mr. Adeniyi, please. This man fills your head with village gossip. You have a deal to sign today, cameras waiting. This talk of poachers and depots is distraction, dangerous distraction. Don't risk everything over an animal's cry." Kofi's jaw tightened. It wasn't just a cry, it was a crime. The fixer groaned, dragging a hand over his face. "Sir, think rationally. You are about to finalize a historic acquisition. Do you want headlines about corruption and blood money tied to your name? You built HaloSat on precision and control, not on chasing rumors." Kofi didn't answer right away. His mind was racing, dragging numbers into a battle with something older, something primal. He had spent his life proving that emotion was weakness, that wealth was the shield against chaos. But the gorilla's sob had cracked the shield, and through the fracture poured memories of his mother's hymns, his father's stern warnings, the boy he used to be before ambition hardened him. Finally, he turned to Bako. "Show me the depot." The fixer's face drained of color. "Sir," Kofi cut him off with a look that silenced boardrooms. "I said show me." They set out after dusk, when the heat thinned but the jungle thickened with sound. Crickets screamed, frogs barked, branches shifted with the weight of unseen creatures. Kofi followed Bako along a barely marked trail, the fixer stumbling behind them, muttering about madness and lawsuits. "Why at night?" Kofi whispered. "Because that is when men move what must not be seen," Bako replied. The path wound downward toward the river, the air cooler but heavier, filled with the damp rot of waterlogged soil. At last, through the tangle of vines, a faint orange glow appeared. Lamplight. They crouched behind a fallen log, and Kofi peered over. The depot was nothing more than a cluster of old logging sheds, roofs patched with rusted tin. But the activity around it told another story. Men moved crates onto trucks. Some carried rifles. Others barked orders in sharp French, cigarettes glowing in the dark. And then Kofi saw the cages. Small metal cages, half hidden under tarps. Inside, the shadows shifted, tiny fingers gripping the bars. His heart stopped. Baby primates, some whimpering, some silent, too weak to move. His breath caught when he saw one with wide black eyes staring straight at him, eyes that mirrored the mother's grief he had witnessed. He nearly stood up then, fury surging, but Bako's hand pressed him down. "Not yet," the guide murmured. The fixer's whisper was frantic. "Do you see, sir? Do you see what happens to men who meddle? These are not amateurs. They are connected, funded. You cannot touch this without destroying yourself." Kofi's pulse pounded in his ears. Destroy himself, or destroy them. For the first time in years, he didn't think about shareholders, markets, or reputations. He thought only of that cage, those eyes, and the mother still crying in the forest. He clenched his father's watch in one hand, the tranquilizer dart in the other, two symbols again colliding in his grip. He whispered to himself, "Not blind, not anymore." But Bako's warning echoed back, buyer or enemy. The choice was closing in, the suspense tightening like the jungle's grip. Kofi knew the cameras and contracts waiting in daylight meant nothing now. The real deal was here, in the shadows, in the depot where innocence was priced like gold. And when he chose, the world he had built might collapse with it. Stay with me, because what Kofi does next will not only change his empire, it will put his life in the crosshairs of men who kill to protect their trade. The depot stank of fear. Even crouched behind the log, Kofi could smell it. A sour mixture of sweat, urine, and damp straw. The smell of cages. The smell of lives reduced to merchandise. He tightened his grip on the dart, watching the men haul crates into the back of a truck. Each box thudded as if carrying stone, but every so often came a faint cry, a whimper too small, too fragile. It sliced through him sharper than any boardroom insult. Beside him, Bako's eyes never left the guards. "These are not bushmen," he whispered. Look at their boots, look at their radios. Kofi looked closer. He saw heavy-duty boots, not village sandals. He saw clean rifles, not rusted hand-me-downs. He saw coordination, discipline. Men who had done this before, men who were being paid well to do it again. But what froze him wasn't the soldiers. It was the truck. Painted on the side, barely visible in the orange lamplight, was a faded logo. Ishiko Timber and Freight, a subsidiary company. One his legal team had quietly acquired 6 months earlier in a package of assets connected to this land deal. His blood went cold. This wasn't someone else's crime. This was his supply chain. He felt the jungle tilt around him, as though the earth itself had yanked away the ground beneath his feet. For years he had prided himself on precision, knowing every subsidiary, every loophole, every shell corporation folded neatly into his empire. And yet here in the humid dark, his empire was a cage, and its bars held more than animals. They held his name. The fixer must have noticed his expression, because he whispered fiercely, "Sir, you must forget what you saw. Please, you cannot tie this to yourself. It will ruin everything." Kofi turned to him slowly, his voice like ice. "You knew?" The fixer shook his head too quickly. "No, sir. You knew," Kofi repeated. His silence was enough of a confession. Kofi's stomach twisted. Rage and nausea wrestled inside him, fighting for dominance. He had trusted this man to orchestrate a smooth acquisition, to cut through the jungle of bureaucracy with clean hands. But his hands were soaked in the trade. Maybe they all were. Down at the depot, a man in a pale linen suit stepped from one of the sheds. His presence shifted the energy instantly. Guards straightened. Orders barked more sharply. This was not a laborer. This was a manager. Kofi leaned forward for a better look, and when the light hit the man's face, his pulse stopped. He recognized him. Henri Duval, a French investor, a polished speaker who had stood beside Kofi at an environmental summit in Paris only last year, shaking hands with ministers, proclaiming the need for global partnerships to protect biodiversity. And here he was, presiding over cages. Kofi's mouth went dry. "Duval," he whispered, barely audible. Bako caught the name, his jaw set like stone. "You know him." "Yes," Kofi said. "Too well." Down below, Duval inspected a cage, lifting the tarp with one manicured hand. The whimper inside rose to a desperate squeal before the man dropped the cloth again. He gave a sharp nod to a guard, then lit a cigar, the smoke curling upward as if mocking the jungle. The fixer pulled at Kofi's sleeve, panic in his eyes. "Sir, I beg you. We must leave now. If they see you—" Kofi didn't move. His chest felt like stone grinding against itself. His empire was tangled with men like Duval, and if he exposed this, the fallout would scorch everything he had built. Shareholders would flee, partners would scatter, governments would whisper. And yet if he walked away, if he let the cages roll downriver, he would never again be able to look at himself without hearing that mother's cry. A choice pressed against him, silence or ruin. Bako leaned closer, voice like a blade sliding free. "This is your chance, Kofi. You can be different, or you can be like them." The words rang in his ears. Be different, or be like them. Down below, the trucks roared to life. Engines grumbled, tires grinding against dirt. The convoy began to move, cages rattling in the dark. One baby gorilla pressed its tiny hands against the bars, eyes wide, staring out into the jungle. For a split second, Kofi swore those eyes met his, and something inside him cracked again. "Where are they taking them?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. "Sometimes to the river," Bako said. "From there, boats, other times to the airstrip." "The airstrip?" Bako nodded. "Smaller planes." No questions asked. Kofi exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He thought of Halosat's global network of satellites, of how he had built a system to track shipping routes, to map illegal mining, to monitor climate patterns. The irony struck him like lightning. He had designed the very tools that could expose these crimes, and yet he had never thought to turn them here, to this place, to this theft. The fixer was sweating now, his whisper frantic. "Sir, please. If you act on this, you won't just destroy yourself, you'll destroy us all. The board, the shareholders, the investors. They'll cut you down. Do you want to lose everything for animals?" Kofi turned his gaze on him, cold and sharp. "Not animals. innocence. The trucks disappeared into the night, their red taillights fading like embers. Silence returned, but it was no relief. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. Bako stood. "If you want to follow this road, I will help. But once you start, you cannot stop. Men like Duvod, they do not forgive, they erase." Kofi looked down at his father's cracked watch. The tick was steady, merciless, each second a demand. He thought of the gorilla in the clearing, tearing leaves into nothing. He thought of her baby, staring through bars with silent questions. He thought of his empire, polished on the outside, rotten at the roots. He slipped the tranquilizer dart deeper into his pocket. "I won't be like them," he said finally. Bako's eyes sharpened, but he only nodded. The fixer groaned, whispering like a man at a funeral. "Then you've signed your own death sentence." Kofi straightened. "No, I've signed theirs. Stay with me, because what Kofi does next will drag him into a war he never saw coming, a war where money, power, and blood are the same currency." The room smelled of perfume and gun oil. It wasn't in the jungle this time, but inside a hidden hall carved into an abandoned warehouse by the river. Bako had led Kofi through the night, weaving past guards with the silence of a ghost. The fixer had begged him to turn back until his voice cracked, but Kofi's stare cut all protests. Now he stood in the shadows of a balcony, looking down on something he never imagined he would see with his own eyes. The auction. Rows of men and women sat on velvet chairs, as if they were at a theater. Most wore expensive suits, diamond pins or silk dresses that glistened in the dim light. Waiters glided with trays of champagne, as though this were Paris, not the belly of a black market jungle. The stage was lit by two harsh spotlights, and in the center sat cages. Small cages. Inside, tiny bodies shifted, clutching bars, eyes darting. Baby gorillas, a young chimp, even a rare golden monkey. Each animal trembling, some whimpering, some silent with shock. Kofi gripped the balcony rail so hard his knuckles whitened. His chest rose and fell with a fury he fought to keep quiet. Every cage was an echo of that gorilla mother's cry, multiplied and packaged for sale. A man in a tuxedo stepped onto the stage, his smile polished, his accent a mix of French and Congolese. "Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue. Tonight, as always, discretion is our greatest gift, and your generosity, our greatest treasure." The crowd chuckled softly. Glasses clinked. The fixer leaned close to Kofi, whispering frantically, "Do you understand who these people are? Ministers' wives, generals' sons, foreign investors, even—" He swallowed. "Even men from your own circles. If they see you here, you are finished." Kofi didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the first cage being wheeled forward. A baby gorilla, no larger than a toddler, its fur patchy from stress, its chest rising in rapid bursts. When the spotlight hit its face, the animal shielded its eyes with one trembling hand. The auctioneer spread his arms. A treasure of the Virunga Highlands. Male, healthy, strong bloodline. We will begin the bidding at 50,000 euros. Hands lifted almost instantly. Men with gold watches, women with jeweled rings. The numbers climbed effortlessly. 60, 70, 80. Kofi's stomach churned. To them, this was a game, a performance. Each gesture of a raised hand was another knife twisting into the mother he had left crying in the jungle. Bako muttered under his breath, "You see now." Kofi nodded faintly. He saw, and the sight was worse than he had imagined. Another cage rolled forward. A pair of baby chimps huddled together, clinging to each other's fur as if they were drowning. The crowd cooed. A man laughed when one reached a hand through the bars. Bids shot upward like bullets. The fixer's whisper grew more desperate. "Sir, we must leave now before someone notices." But Kofi wasn't listening anymore. His eyes had locked on the third cage, a baby gorilla, smaller than the first. Its eyes wide, glistening, darting everywhere as if searching for someone. Its tiny fists beat weakly against the bars, not in defiance but in confusion. Bako leaned closer. "That one belongs to her." The words slammed into Kofi like a falling tree. The mother in the clearing. The cry that haunted him. The torn leaves in her fists. This was her child, alive. Kofi's breath caught. The room blurred for a second, as though the air itself bent around that cage. He gripped the balcony rail tighter, forcing himself not to move, not to roar the truth into the faces of the buyers below. The auctioneer's voice cut through. A rare jewel indeed, female, only 3 months. A future matriarch, perhaps. Shall we begin at 100,000 euros? Hands lifted without hesitation. Numbers rose. 120, 150, 170. The baby whimpered softly, a sound lost in the swell of money. Kofi's vision darkened at the edges. This wasn't just commerce. This was desecration. And Duval, the Frenchman he had recognized at the depot, sat in the front row, cigar glowing, his hand raising calmly as if buying art. The fixer whispered, trembling now, "If you act, they will kill you. If you stay silent, you still live. Think, sir. Think." But Kofi's mind had already crossed a line. He couldn't unsee the baby's eyes. He couldn't unhear the mother's cry. He couldn't untangle his empire from the filth spread out before him. For the first time, he felt the true weight of power, not in contracts or satellites, but in the choice pressed against his chest. Bako touched his arm. Decide, Adeniyi. Buyer or enemy? Kofi looked down at his father's cracked watch, ticking relentlessly against his pulse. He thought of his mother's hymns, of his father's warning. He thought of the gorilla mother tearing leaves into nothing, and he thought of the boardrooms waiting in New York, faces that would smile only so long as their profit lines rose. The auctioneer called out, 200,000 euros. Duval lifted his hand again. The crowd applauded. The baby gorilla pressed her face to the bars, eyes glimmering. For one terrifying second, Kofi swore she looked straight at him, straight through the shadows, straight into the soul of the man who could save her, or abandon her. The choice was a blade at his throat. And Kofi Adeniyi, billionaire, CEO, power broker, knew this much. Whichever way he moved, the world he had built would never be the same again. Stay with me, because in the next breath Kofi will make a decision that shocks not just the jungle, but every man and woman in that auction hall. The air in the auction hall grew heavier with every bid. 220,000 euros, the auctioneer called, his voice slick with satisfaction. The crowd murmured approval. Duval's hand lifted once more, calm as a man ordering wine. A flick of his fingers, nothing more, but with it came a death sentence for a bond as old as time, a mother and her child torn forever. Kofi's heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat slicked his palms despite the cold breeze from the ceiling fans. Every tick of his father's cracked watch echoed louder in his head, a drumbeat of accusation. The baby gorilla whimpered again, clinging to the bars. Her tiny fists gripped the metal so hard her knuckles whitened. She scanned the crowd with darting, panicked eyes, but no face there held salvation. Only hunger, only greed. Kofi felt his throat tighten. If he stayed hidden, the baby would vanish into the world of private collections, behind steel gates and armed guards, never to feel her mother's arms again. If he stepped forward, if he acted now, he would expose himself. And men like Duval didn't forgive exposure. Bako's whisper was sharp in his ear. Do nothing unless you mean war. The fixer's whisper was more desperate. Sir, please, for God's sake, think of your empire. Walk away. This isn't your fight. But it was his fight. That truth sat in his chest like a stone, because the company whose name hid in the shadows of this operation wasn't someone else's. It was his. And the blood smeared on those cages would stain his empire, whether he admitted it or not. The auctioneer spread his arms wide, drawing the crowd's eyes back to him. Do I hear 250,000? A jeweled hand in the third row rose gracefully. The audience applauded as if this were theater, not trafficking. The baby let out a weak cry, too small to stir the crowd, too soft to break their spell. But to Kofi it thundered like judgment. His chest burned, his vision tunneled. He remembered the mother's body rocking in the jungle, the sound of leaves shredding in her fists. He remembered her eyes when they had caught his, a mirror of despair begging without words. He gripped the tranquilizer dart in his pocket, its sharp end pressed against his skin, a reminder of the line he hadn't yet crossed. He could still leave, still pretend, still hide behind the comfortable silence of men in power. 270,000, the auctioneer declared. Another hand, another smattering of applause. Kofi's body tensed. He was seconds from breaking, and then a sudden sound cracked the room. The baby gorilla, as if sensing her fate, began to wail, louder than before, a high-pitched scream that sliced through the hall. Her tiny fists rattled the bars, her body shaking in panic. It wasn't just a cry, it was a call. A call to the mother who could no longer hear her. A call to anyone who still could. The hall went quiet for a heartbeat. Even the auctioneer paused, smile flickering. That was the moment Kofi moved. He stepped out of the shadows. The fixer gasped. Bako cursed under his breath, but it was too late. Kofi Adeniyi, billionaire, CEO, son of a watchmaker, walked down the narrow staircase into the glow of the spotlights. Heads turned, whispers rippled like fire across the velvet seats. Some recognized his face instantly. One of Africa's wealthiest men, known for tech, satellites, clean suits, and cleaner deals. His presence here was an anomaly, a disruption, a threat. Duval's eyes narrowed, cigar smoke curling from his lips. Kofi walked straight toward the stage, each step a drumbeat of defiance. His watch ticked louder than the applause that had vanished into silence. When he reached the auctioneer, he didn't ask. He commanded. "That cage," he said, pointing. His voice carried through the hall like thunder rolling over the jungle. "It is not for sale." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some laughed nervously, others exchanged wary glances. The auctioneer blinked, his smile faltering. "Monsieur Adeniyi, what an unexpected honor. But I assure you all our treasures are—" "I said," Kofi repeated, his tone steel. "It is not for sale." The fixer appeared at his side, whispering frantically. "Sir, please, this is madness, they'll kill you." But Kofi didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the baby gorilla. Duval rose slowly from his seat, his linen suit glowing pale in the light. He took a long drag of his cigar, exhaled, and let the smoke drift between them. "Mon ami," he said softly, his accent smooth but edged with venom. "I did not expect to see you here. Tell me, are you a buyer?" The word hung heavy in the air. Buyer or enemy. Kofi's pulse thundered. He thought of his empire, his board, the billions at stake, the eyes of the crowd watching, waiting for him to define himself. He clenched his fist, the dart biting into his palm. "No," he said finally. His voice cut the air. "I'm not a buyer." The hall went still. Duval's smile sharpened into a blade. "Then you are a problem." Guards shifted instantly, rifles lifting, boots stomping forward. The crowd gasped, some rising from their seats, others clapping nervously as if still unsure whether this was part of the show. The baby gorilla whimpered again, pressing her face to the bars. Kofi took a step closer to her cage. His heart hammered, but his voice stayed steady. "You'll have to kill me to take her." Duval flicked his cigar to the ground. "Gladly." The rifles cocked in unison. "Stay with me, because this is where Kofi's war truly begins. When power, profit, and blood collide in a room where mercy has no price tag." The rifles rose as one, their muzzles swallowing the air. Kofi Adeniyi stood in the spotlight. His shadow stretched long across the stage. His suit was damp with sweat, but his voice was steady, his presence larger than the room itself. The baby gorilla whimpered behind the bars, unaware that its fate balanced on the edge of gunmetal. Duval stepped forward, his shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor. The smile on his face was thin, his eyes glinting like glass shards. "Do you know what you have just done, mon ami? You walked into a room where no one is innocent and you tried to play savior." He gestured to the crowd. "These men and women hold power in their countries. They dine with presidents. They buy laws with coins from their pockets. And you think you can stop them with words?" Kofi's jaw clenched. "I think I can stop you." The words cut the air. Some in the crowd gasped. Others laughed nervously, eager to disguise fear with amusement. The rifles clicked louder as fingers tightened against triggers. The fixer, pale and shaking, tried to wedge himself between them. "Gentlemen, please. This is a misunderstanding. Mr. Adeniyi is here only as a guest. He means no—" "Silence," Duval snapped. His eyes never left Kofi. "You made your choice. Not a buyer. That makes you an enemy." Bako's voice rose suddenly from the balcony above. Calm, certain. "You point those rifles at the wrong man. Do you know who he is?" The guards hesitated, eyes flicking to one another. Some recognized the name, perhaps even the face. But Duval sneered. "A man with too much money and too little sense." Kofi didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately. The rifles lifted higher, guards bristling. But instead of a weapon, he held up the tranquilizer dart, its metal tip catching the light. "This," Kofi said, his voice sharp as glass, "was found in your jungle, fired by your men. With it, you stole this child from her mother. And I know the chain it runs through, every crate, every ledger, every account. Do you want me to speak the names? Do you want me to tell this room exactly who profits from blood? The crowd shifted uneasily. Some whispered. Some stared at the floor. The illusion of elegance wavered. The perfume of power soured. Duval's jaw tightened. You think threats matter here? They matter everywhere, Kofi said. Because I built HaloSat. And I see everything. The words landed like thunder. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Duval's face. He knew what HaloSat's satellites could do. Track ships, watch borders, map movements invisible to ordinary eyes. And if Kofi turned that vision here, their hidden trade would burn in the light. But Duval's doubt hardened back into anger. Then you are already dead. He snapped his fingers. The rifles cocked. The crowd froze, caught between horror and complicity. Some reached for their glasses, others for the exits. None moved to stop it. Kofi exhaled, his watch ticking like a drum at his wrist. He stepped closer to the cage, placing himself fully between the baby gorilla and the rifles. His voice carried through the hall, clear, defiant. Kill me, and every satellite I own will turn its eye to this jungle. Every journalist I fund will find your names. Every boardroom I sit in will know exactly what you are. Kill me, and you bury yourselves with me. The silence that followed was razor thin. The guards hesitated. Their rifles trembled slightly, not from fear of Kofi's words, but from fear of the consequences that clung to him like armor. Duval's face darkened. He had built his empire on fear, but Kofi had turned it back on him. Still, he wasn't ready to yield. He leaned closer, his voice low enough for only Kofi to hear. You think you can win this, but I have seen men like you before. Righteous, angry. They all end the same, buried in shallow graves no one remembers. Kofi met his gaze, unblinking. Then bury me standing. For a heartbeat, the hall felt like it might explode. One wrong breath, and gunfire would rip through velvet and glass. But then, from the back of the room, a voice cut through. Enough! It was a woman, elegant in a dark silk dress, pearls shining against her throat. She rose slowly, her face pale but her eyes sharp. Kofi recognized her faintly, a senator's wife from West Africa, known for her philanthropy. She looked at Duval, her voice trembling but strong. We came here for discretion, not for spectacle. Put your guns down. Others began to murmur agreement. The illusion was cracking. Not morality, self-preservation. If Duval turned the hall into a slaughterhouse, the stink would cling to every guest. And these people valued their masks more than blood. Duval's lips curled, but he saw the shift. Reluctantly, he waved his hand. The guards lowered their rifles, though their eyes still burned with violence. Kofi didn't move. He kept himself between the cage and the danger, his heart still pounding. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously, trying to regain control. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps a short intermission. But Kofi cut him off, his voice ringing across the hall. This auction is finished. The crowd erupted in whispers, some outraged, some relieved. Duval's glare was a promise of future war. You think you've won, Adeniyi. You've only marked yourself, and marks can be erased. Kofi didn't reply. He crouched instead, his hand resting gently against the cage bars. The baby gorilla blinked at him, tiny fingers brushing against his. For the first time her cries softened, as if sensing that someone had finally answered. The hall watched in silence. Bako descended the stairs, standing beside him. The fixer followed reluctantly, pale as chalk, muttering about suicide. Kofi stood tall again, facing the crowd. Remember this night. Remember who stood for profit and who stood for life, because from this moment, I am not your partner. I am your shadow. And shadows reveal everything. The baby clung to the bars, eyes wide, as if holding him to his vow. Stay with me, because the war Kofi just declared will not stay in this hall. It will spread into every corner of his empire, and the enemies waiting in the dark will stop at nothing to break him. The night after the auction, Kofi Adeniyi sat alone in his room at the governor's compound, staring at the cracked face of his father's watch. The ticking was merciless. Each second felt like a question he could not answer. The baby gorilla's cries still clung to him, echoing in the marrow of his bones. He could still feel the brush of her tiny fingers against his through the bars, and he could still see Duval's smile, the kind of smile that promised patience, vengeance, inevitability. Bako had said little on the walk back. Only once did he speak, pausing under the canopy of stars. "You stepped out of shadow," he told Kofi. "Now the hunters will come." The fixer, on the other hand, had not stopped talking. His voice rose in frantic whispers, warnings piled on warnings. "You've doomed us. You've doomed yourself. Do you understand the board will destroy you for this? Do you understand who Duval is?" But in this room, silence returned. Only the watch ticked, and in that tick Kofi heard his mother's hymns, his father's lessons, and the gorilla mother's scream braided into one relentless rhythm. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but it tasted of ashes. He pushed it away. The door creaked. Bako slipped inside, moving like a shadow even here. He placed something on the table, a folded cloth. Kofi opened it. Inside lay a crude carving, a gorilla etched into wood. "My son made this," Bako said. "He asked me to give it to you, said you should carry it, to remember why you must not look away." Kofi traced the carving with his finger. The lines were uneven, jagged, the kind only a child's hand could make, but it carried a truth more precise than any ledger he had ever signed. "Why me?" Kofi asked. His voice was quiet, but raw. "There are governments, agencies, NGOs. Why must this fall on me?" Bako's eyes held him steady. "Because you saw, and once you see, you are responsible." The words sank deep. Kofi wanted to argue. He wanted to insist that his empire, his billions, his reputation, those were his responsibilities, not this, not a child in a cage, not a mother crying in the jungle. But he couldn't. The truth clung too tightly. The fixer barged in then, his face flushed with panic. "Sir, I've been on the phone all night. The board knows. They've heard whispers about last night. They're furious. If you continue with this madness, they'll strip you of control. They'll leak stories, ruin your credibility, collapse everything you've built." Kofi leaned back, exhaustion heavy in his bones. "So be it." The fixer stared as if he had gone insane. "So be it? So be it? Sir, you worked your whole life for Halosat. You fought governments, competitors, entire industries, and you'll throw it away for an animal?" Kofi's eyes snapped to him, sharp as broken glass. "Not an animal. Innocence." The fixer fell silent, stunned by the weight in his voice. Kofi stood, pacing the room. "Do you know why men like Duval win? Because we let them. We hide behind contracts, behind optics, behind the comfort of saying the problem is someone else's to solve. But I saw her. That mother. That cry will outlive me if I do nothing." The fixer shook his head, desperate. "Sir, if you go against them, you'll lose everything." "Maybe," Kofi said softly. He looked down at the carving in his hand. "But if I don't, I've already lost." Bako nodded once, approving, though his eyes were shadowed with warning. "War will come. You must be ready." The room seemed to shrink around him, the air pressing tight. Kofi's mind whirled, torn between two worlds. In one, he kept his empire intact, his fortune safe, his board satisfied. He would walk away from the jungle, let Duval continue his trade, and bury his conscience beneath another billion. In the other, he would fight. He would expose the trade, rescue the baby, face down men with guns and governments with teeth. And in doing so, he might lose Halosat, his fortune, his legacy. The choice clawed at him, ripping him in two. He thought of his father, working long nights by lamplight, repairing watches for pennies but never cheating a customer. He thought of his mother, singing hymns even when grief hollowed her chest. He thought of himself as a boy, standing barefoot in Lagos, vowing to build a world where no one could take from him again. And then he thought of the gorilla mother, beating her fists into the earth, shredding leaves as though tearing time apart. The watch ticked. The carving pressed into his palm. The choice grew sharper. The fixer broke the silence. "Sir, if you do this, there's no coming back. Not to the board. Not to safety. Not to the life you've built." Kofi met his gaze. His eyes were steady now, the storm within finally narrowing into resolve. "Then I won't go back." The fixer sagged, defeated. Bako inclined his head, as though he had expected nothing less. Kofi set the watch on the table beside the carving. 2 symbols, 2 lives. His father's discipline, a child's hope. He stared at them for a long moment, then whispered almost to himself, "Buyer or enemy? I've chosen." The room fell silent again, the air heavy with the gravity of that vow. Outside, the jungle pulsed with sound, alive and waiting. Somewhere the mother gorilla still mourned. Somewhere her baby still sat in a cage, waiting to be sold. And somewhere Duval sharpened his knives, preparing to erase the man who dared defy him. Stay with me, because from this point, Kofi has stepped beyond the edge. And in the war he has chosen, there will be no safe ground, no easy victories, and no way back to the life he once knew. Kofi Adeniyi had waged wars before, but never like this. In the corporate world, wars were fought with contracts, hostile takeovers, sudden acquisitions that bled rivals dry. But this was a battlefield where silence could kill, where one wrong whisper could end with a body in a ditch. The morning after his decision, Kofi summoned only 2 people to his private quarters, Bako and the Fixer, who now looked at him with equal parts terror and resentment. "We move tonight," Kofi said. The Fixer's eyes bulged. "Tonight? Sir, please. Duval's men are everywhere. They'll be expecting retaliation. You can't just—" "I'm not asking permission," Kofi interrupted. His voice was calm, but there was iron beneath it. "The baby is still alive. Every day we wait, the chances shrink. I will not watch her be shipped to some collector in Dubai or Moscow while we argue." Bako leaned forward. "You are right. They move the shipments fast. If we wait, she is gone forever." The Fixer groaned, running his hands through his hair. "Sir, do you understand what you're saying? You're a billionaire. Your face is everywhere. You can't sneak into a smuggling depot like some mercenary. They'll spot you in an instant." Kofi set his father's watch on the table, the tick filling the silence. "Then we make me invisible." By nightfall, the plan had begun. Bako guided Kofi into the underbelly of the city, far from the governor's compound, into narrow alleys where electricity flickered and the air smelled of diesel and roasted corn. They entered a back room lit by a single bulb. Inside waited a woman sharpening a knife with methodical strokes. "This is Amara," Bako said. "She owes me favors." Amara lifted her eyes, sharp, untrusting. She looked Kofi over, taking in the tailored suit he had traded for a plain shirt and dust-stained trousers. "This him? The rich man who thinks he can fight hunters?" "He's not just rich," Bako replied. "He's angry," she smirked. "Angry men die fast." Kofi met her gaze unflinching. "Then teach me how to live angry longer." For a moment, silence stretched. Then Amara slid the knife back into its sheath. "You'll need more than anger. You'll need tools, and men who can disappear." The Fixer paced the room like a trapped animal. "Sir, this is lunacy. These are criminals, not accountants. You can't fight them with speeches." Kofi ignored him. His mind was already moving, calculating logistics the way he once mapped satellite launches. "Duval moves shipments through 3 points," he said, pacing. "The depot in the jungle, the airstrip, the river. If we hit the river, we'll be exposed. The airstrip is too fortified. That leaves the depot." Bako nodded. "They will expect nothing. No one has dared touch it." Amara tilted her head. "What exactly are you after? Money? Leverage?" Kofi's voice hardened. "The baby gorilla." Amara's brow furrowed. "You risk your empire for an animal?" "Not just an animal," Kofi said. "A promise." His words hung heavy, weighted by something deeper than profit. Amara studied him a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Fine. You'll need a distraction. Fire, noise, chaos. We create panic. You take what you came for." Bako added, "We must move fast. Once the alarm sounds, Duval's men will come like rain." Kofi exhaled, his resolve solidifying. For years he had been the man who controlled the battlefield from glass towers, who never dirtied his hands. But tonight, he would step into the mud. The Fixer collapsed into a chair, muttering, "You'll burn everything to the ground. Your board will hang you. The investors will vanish. You'll lose HaloSat. You'll lose—" Kofi cut him off. "I will lose more if I stay still." The Fixer looked at him as if seeing a stranger. That night clouds swallowed the moon, plunging the jungle into darkness. Perfect cover. Kofi moved with Bako and Amara through the trees, the damp earth sucking at their boots. Each sound felt amplified. The snap of a branch, the buzz of insects, the distant call of something wild. When the depot came into view, Kofi's pulse surged. Lamps glowed against corrugated metal. Guards smoked cigarettes, their rifles slung lazy but ready. Trucks idled, headlights dimmed. And there, through the gaps of a tarp, he saw cages. Tiny silhouettes shifted inside. One in particular pressed close to the bars, eyes wide, as if sensing something beyond the night. The baby. Kofi gripped the wooden carving Bako's son had given him, the edges cutting into his palm. "Don't look away." Amara crouched beside him, whispering, "I'll start the fire. When they rush to it, you go. Fast. Clean. No hesitation." Bako touched Kofi's shoulder. "Once we take her, there is no turning back. You understand this?" "I understood the moment I stepped out of the shadows," Kofi whispered. Amara slipped away, silent as a blade. Moments later, smoke began to curl from the far side of the depot. A shout rang out, then another. Guards scrambled, barking orders. Flames licked upward, orange against the black. Bako tugged Kofi's arm. "Now!" They darted forward, shadows cutting through the chaos. The fire crackled louder, smoke billowing, shouts rising. Guards rushed to douse it, leaving only 2 by the cages. Kofi's heart thundered. Every step brought him closer to the choice that had haunted him. And then he was there. The baby gorilla clung to the bars, eyes wide, tiny hands reaching. When her gaze met his, Kofi felt the world collapse into silence. It was her, the child of the mother who had cried in the clearing. The reason he had stepped into this war. Behind him, Bako whispered urgently, "Hurry!" Kofi gripped the lock. Solid steel. He yanked. It didn't budge. The baby whimpered, pressing closer. Bako drew a knife, working at the latch. Sparks scraped. The fixer appeared behind them, whispering frantically, "They'll kill us. We must leave before—" But before he could finish, a voice boomed through the smoke. "Did you think I wouldn't be watching?" Duval. He stepped out of the shadows, flanked by armed men, his linen suit glowing ghostly in the firelight. His cigar ember glowed like an eye. Kofi froze, his hand still gripping the cage. Duval's smile was thin as a razor. "You want her? Then come take her." The rifles lifted again, steel glinting through the smoke. The fire roared. The jungle held its breath, and Kofi Adeniyi knew the war had truly begun. "Stay with me, because the next move will decide whether he walks away with the baby or not at all." The night cracked open with gunfire. Muzzles flared through the smoke, bullets whining past like hornets. Kofi threw himself against the cage, shielding the baby as sparks burst from the metal bars. The gorilla wailed, clinging to him through the gaps, her tiny fingers brushing his arm. "Move!" Bako roared, shoving Kofi down as another volley ripped overhead. Amara burst from the fire's glow, a blade flashing in her hand. She cut one guard's throat clean, then dragged his rifle into her grip. The man collapsed without a sound. Chaos swallowed the depot. The fire Amara had started now roared hungrily, smoke choking the air, flames curling over corrugated roofs. Men shouted orders in French and Lingala, their voices sharp with panic. Through it all, Duval's calm voice cut like a knife. "Bring me Adeniyi alive. Kill the rest." The fixer screamed, crouched low against a stack of crates. "Sir, they'll butcher us. We need to run." But Kofi's hands were still on the lock. He yanked desperately, but the steel refused. Bako shoved his machete into the seam, muscles straining. Sparks flew. The baby whimpered, pressing closer. "Faster," Kofi hissed. The lock snapped. The cage door swung open. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the baby crawling into Kofi's arms, her body trembling, fur damp with fear. She clung to him instantly, burying her face against his chest. And then the world roared back. "Go!" Bako shouted, pulling him toward the trees. Amara covered them, firing short bursts into the smoke. Guards dropped, shouting curses as they scrambled for cover. The fire lit the night, casting the jungle in a hellish glow. Kofi ran, the baby clutched against him. Each breath was fire, each step mud and roots tearing at his shoes. Behind him, boots thundered, rifles cracked. The jungle itself seemed to explode with violence. "Left!" Bako barked. They veered down a narrow path, branches whipping their faces. The baby whimpered against Kofi's chest, and he tightened his hold. "It's all right," he whispered, though the words felt like lies. "I've got you now." The fixer stumbled behind, wheezing. "This is madness. You'll kill us all." "Then die quiet," Amara snapped, shoving him forward. Bullets snapped through the leaves, shredding bark. One tore past Kofi's shoulder, so close he felt its heat. He staggered but kept running. His watch ticked wildly against his wrist, as if counting down the seconds to his death. Ahead, the river glimmered faintly, silver beneath the fire's glow. "This way," Bako shouted, pointing. But a figure stepped from the shadows to block their path. Duval. His linen suit was streaked with soot, but his smile was intact. He held no rifle, only a pistol, steady in his hand. "You run well, mon ami," he said, voice calm even as chaos raged behind him. "But it ends here." Kofi stopped, chest heaving, the baby clutching his shirt. Duval's eyes flicked to the gorilla in his arms. "Give her to me, and perhaps I let you crawl away alive." Kofi met his gaze. "She's not yours to take." Duval's smile widened. "Everything here is mine. The land, the men, even you, Adeniyi. You think you are free? No, you are mine now. A shadow on my floor." His pistol rose. Amara raised her rifle, but Duval was faster. The shot cracked, echoing across the river. Amara cried out, the bullet grazing her arm. She staggered but held her ground, teeth gritted. Bako lunged, swinging his machete. Duval fired again. Bako twisted, the bullet grazing his ribs. But he kept coming, blade flashing. Duval stepped back, cursing, and fired a third time. This shot slammed into Bako's shoulder. He fell hard, blood soaking his shirt. "Bako!" Kofi shouted. Duval's pistol snapped back to Kofi. "Your turn." The baby whimpered. The jungle went silent around them as if holding its breath. Kofi clenched his teeth. He had built empires on risk, had gambled billions in markets that shifted like storms. But this was no gamble. This was the moment his life, his fortune, his legacy, all balanced on the edge of Duval's trigger. And then, from the river, a horn blared. A boat. Two of Amara's allies surged from the shadows, opening fire. Duval cursed, diving for cover. Bullets shredded the ground where Kofi stood. Amara grabbed his arm, yanking him toward the water. "Move!" Kofi sprinted, the baby clinging to him, her cries swallowed by the roar of gunfire. They stumbled down the bank, sliding into the mud. The boat's engine growled louder, its spotlight cutting across the water. Behind them, Duval's voice thundered through the chaos. "You can run, Adeniyi, but you cannot hide. I will take her back, and when I do, you will beg me to kill you." The river swallowed his words as Kofi leapt into the waiting boat, clutching the baby to his chest. Amara followed, blood dripping from her arm. Two men pulled Bako aboard, his face pale, teeth clenched against pain. The boat roared to life, cutting through the current. Bullets splashed into the water behind them, but they didn't stop. The jungle blurred. The depot vanished in smoke and flame, and Duval's fury echoed on the wind. Kofi held the baby close, her tiny heartbeat racing against his. He whispered into her fur, more vow than comfort. "I've got you now. I'll get you home." But in the depths of his chest he knew the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. "Stay with me, because in the next chapter, Kofi will return the baby to her mother, but the cost of that reunion will shatter him in ways he never expected." The river carried them deep into the jungle, far from the depot's flames. Smoke still clung to Kofi's clothes, mixing with the musk of mud and fear. The boat's engine growled low as Amara's allies steered through black water, weaving between twisted roots. Kofi sat near the bow, cradling the baby gorilla. She was light in his arms, but her presence weighed more than any crown he had ever worn. Her breathing was shallow, her tiny hands clutching his shirt with desperate strength. Each time she whimpered, his chest tightened, and he whispered softly, "Shh, you're safe now. I've got you." Bako lay at the stern, pale from blood loss, his shoulder wrapped in a rag. He gritted his teeth, but never complained. His eyes, when they met Kofi's, carried no fear, only the quiet pride of a man who knew why he bled. Amara sat beside him, her injured arm bound tight. She smirked through the pain. "You're crazier than I thought, billionaire." Kofi didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the bundle in his arms. For years he had measured success in billions, in launches, in partnerships. Tonight, success was measured in heartbeats, and he prayed he hadn't been too late. They reached the bank at dawn. Mist curled from the ground, veiling the forest in silver. Kofi climbed out, boots sinking into the mud, the baby still clutched against him. The jungle was alive with sound, birds calling, insects buzzing, but beneath it all he swore he could hear something else. A faint cry, familiar. The mother. Bako pushed himself upright, despite the pain. She is near. She will know. Kofi moved cautiously into the trees, the baby pressed to his chest. Every step felt like walking into judgment. He had faced investors, rivals, presidents, but none of them terrified him like this moment. And then, through the mist, she appeared, the gorilla mother. Her massive form rose from the undergrowth, shoulders heaving, eyes wide. She froze when she saw him, her body tensing, a low growl rumbling from her chest. Her gaze dropped to the bundle in his arms. Kofi stopped, heart pounding. Slowly, carefully, he knelt in the mud. The baby stirred, giving a small whimper. The sound cut through the clearing like lightning. The mother's growl broke. Her eyes widened, and she took one hesitant step forward. Kofi lowered the baby to the ground. Tiny hands reached upward, a weak cry rising from her throat. The mother surged forward, scooping her child into her massive arms. She cradled the baby against her chest, rocking, keening, a sound of grief transforming into something else. Relief, reclamation. Kofi fell back on his heels, breath shuddering. His vision blurred as tears welled unbidden. He had not cried in decades. Not when he buried his mother. Not when rivals tried to destroy him. Not when loneliness gnawed his soul in penthouses high above the world. But here in the mud, watching a mother hold her child again, the walls cracked. The gorilla mother pressed her face into the baby's fur, inhaling, confirming, promising. Her body trembled as if the universe had returned a piece of her soul. The baby clung to her, tiny fingers digging into her chest, a sound like a laugh, thin, weak, but alive, escaping her throat. Bako limped into the clearing, his voice soft. "Now you see why we fight." Kofi nodded, unable to speak. His chest ached with something he had forgotten long ago, the raw, unfiltered weight of love. The fixer stumbled behind them, his face pale. "We should leave before anyone sees. If word spreads, let it spread," Kofi whispered. His eyes never left the reunion before him. "Let the world know." The mother looked up then, her gaze locking with Kofi's. Her eyes were still wild, still dangerous. But there was something else. Recognition, a silent acknowledgement between two parents who had both known loss. Kofi bowed his head slightly, not as a man of wealth, not as a conqueror, but as a son who remembered what grief had done to his own mother. The gorilla huffed, holding her baby tighter, then slowly retreated into the jungle. The mist swallowed her, but her sound lingered, no longer grief, but a song of reunion. Kofi remained kneeling in the mud long after she vanished. His father's cracked watch ticked steadily at his wrist, each second a reminder of the vow he had made. When he finally stood, the fixer rushed to his side. "Sir, you've made enemies you cannot imagine. Duval will come. The board will turn against you. You'll lose everything." Kofi's eyes were steady, his voice calm. "No, I've gained everything." Amara laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're going to burn the world down, billionaire." "Not burn," Kofi said. "Expose." Bako gave a grim nod. "But Duval will not stop. He will come for you, for all of us." "I know," Kofi replied. He looked toward the jungle where the mother had disappeared. "But now he knows something too, that I will not stop." The words settled like a vow in the mist. The baby was safe. The mother was whole again. But the cost of that act hung heavy in the air. Duval would not forgive. The board would not protect him. And the empire Kofi had spent a lifetime building now stood on the edge of collapse. Yet in his chest, the fear had changed. It no longer paralyzed him, it sharpened him. For the first time, Kofi understood that true power wasn't in satellites or billions. It was in choosing to stand when silence was safer. Stay with me, because in the final chapter, Kofi will face the legacy of his choice, and the shocking price of keeping his vow will redefine him forever. The news broke like wildfire. Within days, whispers of the disrupted auction spread beyond the jungle, carried by traders, pilots, and frightened dignitaries who had attended that night. By the time it reached Europe, the story had already grown teeth. An African billionaire had confronted poachers. A network of elites had been exposed, and in the center of it all was one name: Kofi Adeniyi. The board of Halosat called an emergency meeting. They demanded explanations. They demanded silence. But Kofi gave them neither. "I saw it with my own eyes," he told them across the polished table. "Our subsidiaries are tied to trafficking. We profit from blood. I will not hide this." The directors exchanged cold glances. Some whispered about liability, others worried about markets. One, braver than the rest, said aloud, "If you admit this publicly, you will destroy Halosat." "Then let it be destroyed," Kofi replied. The vote came swiftly. They stripped him of his chairmanship, his shares plummeted. The empire he had built with decades of relentless ambition collapsed in days. Investors fled, headlines mocked, rivals circled like vultures. But in the jungle, another story grew. Cameras captured the image of a gorilla mother reunited with her child, footage leaked by an anonymous hand. The world saw her tears, her trembling arms, the miracle of return. They saw Kofi kneeling in the mud, bowing his head as if in prayer. It went viral, not as scandal, but as symbol. Children shared it in classrooms. Activists painted it on walls. Politicians quoted it in speeches, though most had no right to. And somewhere, in the dark corners where men like Duval thrived, the image burned like fire. Kofi lived in exile now, far from glass towers and boardrooms. His wealth was gone, his name dragged through courts and tabloids. But he walked the jungle freely, his steps lighter than they had ever been. One evening, he returned to the clearing where it all began. Mist hung low. The air smelled of rain. He stood still, waiting, and then she appeared, the gorilla mother. Her baby clung to her side, stronger now, eyes bright. The mother watched him, chest heaving, but there was no growl this time, only recognition. Kofi raised his hand slightly, a silent greeting. She huffed softly, then turned back into the trees, her child following. The forest swallowed them whole, but not before the baby glanced back once, eyes meeting his. That look stayed with him long after they vanished. Meanwhile, Duval hunted him. Anonymous threats arrived daily. Cars trailed him in the city. Once, a shot shattered the window of the safe house he used, but Kofi no longer lived afraid. He knew the risk had always been death. He had accepted that the night he chose not to look away. And yet, Duval failed. Because for every man he bought, 10 others now whispered Kofi's name with reverence. For every shadow he sent, light grew brighter around the story. Duval had power, but Kofi had something more dangerous: memory. Months passed. Kofi began funding covert ranger units, using what little remained of his fortune to train men and women willing to fight. He worked in secret, away from cameras, but the legend grew. Some called him foolish, others called him finished, but those who truly saw called him something else: a man reborn. One night, sitting by a fire with Bako and Amara, he spoke quietly. "I thought I built an empire," he said, "but it was hollow, a tower of glass. And when it shattered, I thought I was ruined. But now I see, maybe this was the empire I was meant to build." Bako nodded, his eyes glowing in the firelight. "One built not on profit, but on promise." Amara smirked. "And on blood." Kofi met her gaze. "Yes, but mine, not theirs." The fire crackled. The jungle hummed. And for the first time he felt at peace. Years later, children would learn his name not from business magazines, but from murals painted on cracked walls. They would learn of the billionaire who turned his back on fortune to kneel in the mud, to save a life that was not his, to fight a war no one asked him to fight. They would learn that sometimes the richest legacy is not the empire you keep, but the one you give away. In the silence of the jungle, Kofi listened to the forest breathe. He touched his father's cracked watch, still ticking against his wrist. He held the wooden carving Bako's son had given him, its edges worn smooth now from years in his pocket. 2 symbols, 2 lives, 2 promises. The watch ticked. The jungle answered. And though he had lost everything the world once valued, he knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that he had finally won. Stay with me, because this may sound like the end, but it isn't. It's only chapter 1 of a legacy that will outlive even death.